Welcome to the afternoon session. This session is going to be devoted to how our perceptions of food and wine are shaped and how our perceptions shape what we taste. I'm Patrick Farrell. I'm a professor of linguistics here at UC Davis. And I'm going to introduce the speakers, and then we'll have they'll each give their talk, and then we ask that you hold your questions until the end, and they'll sit up here in the front, and you can ask questions of the panel, okay? Our first speaker then today is Charlotte Biltekoff, who is an associate professor of American Studies and Food Science and Technology at UC Davis. So let me ask you a question though first. So if you've got a restaurant named Black Angus, is that going to be serving healthy food? Well, probably going to be food with protein, but there's probably going to be also a lot of stuff that you'd be saying, no, cholesterol problems from this, right? How about if you had a restaurant that was called Greens? Does anyone know Greens restaurant in San Francisco? Okay, so are they serving healthy food? Yeah, it's a vegetarian restaurant that serves greens like salads and organic vegetables and stuff, right? And that's going to be healthy food because greens are good for us, right? Charlotte's going to talk to us a little bit more about the cultural politics of food and health. She's the author of a book entitled Author of Eating Right in America. And today she'll talk to us about green smoothies and other things of that sort.
We'll talk about this later. Okay, so unfortunately there's this giant podium here, and yes, I'm trapped behind it, so you cannot see my very powerful posture. But I assure you, it is impressive. So my proposal for today is that perception is history. And I mean that in two different ways. First, I mean that what has happened in the past really shapes our perceptions in the present, but also that understanding the past can shift our perceptions in the present. So we'll explore both of those ways of thinking about perception as history in my talk today. How many of you have had a green juice? Yeah, so most of you know that there's green juices are really popular. There's a craze for fresh pressed juices and green smoothies. And if we want to understand this thing that is the green juice, we can think about it through the lens of nutritional science. We can think about it nutritionally. We can think about it and understand it through sensory science. But there is a lot about the green juice that science cannot help us understand, right? It cannot tell us why it is so popular, what the experience of consuming this beverage really means to people or conveys to other people. It can't tell us, for example, why style writers are writing articles about the green smoothie as a fashion statement. So if we want to understand this beverage in terms of what it really means to consume it, we have to think about perception in cultural terms, right? We have to step back, I would argue, and really think about the question of what happens if we think culturally about this beverage. This is the question that's really at the heart of my research. And I would argue that if we want to understand the green smoothie, if we want to understand green juices and fresh pressed juices in general, and the sort of virtuous aura of the juice cleanse, for example, that you see here, that we have to step back into context, and that we really actually have to understand a broader politics of nutrition within which the green smoothie gets its meaning. I would argue, in fact, that if we want to understand green smoothies, we have to think also about bad sodas, right? And that we may not even have the craze for fresh pressed juices that we have today if we didn't at the same time also have campaigns to tax and ban and limit soda consumption. So we can think, this is the picture of my neighbors in Berkeley celebrating the first tax on sugary sodas, which was passed in November. I would also argue that if we want to think about, if we want to understand the green smoothie, we should also consider the sort of illicit and moral component of when we think about good foods and bad foods, good drinks and bad drinks, right? And as this image conveys, this is from an image that was on the cover of the New Yorker during the time when Mayor Michael Bloomberg was trying to ban sodas over 16 ounces. And it really conveys the sort of illicit nature of this, back alley big gulp, right? Which suggests that it's really not just about the nutrients. This really speaks to the moral component of the conversation going on about both good drinks and bad drinks. So I would also want to argue that when we talk about good foods and bad foods, green juices and bad sodas, that we are always also at the same time talking about good people and bad people. And by that, I mean we're thinking about morality and responsibility and even about the fitness for citizenship. And I want to suggest that history can really help us to understand these social and cultural dynamics. History, I believe, do we have any historians here today? A couple, okay. So those of you who are not historians might think that history is like old and maybe even irrelevant, and it's really just about the past, right? But I want to argue today that history is an extremely useful tool for helping us to see the present differently. It really can help us see things that other people take for granted in new ways. Why I love history is because it messes with our understanding of what's normal and even what's true in the present. And this is a very powerful tool for really rethinking perception in a sense. So in the rest of my talk today, I want to draw on some of the findings from my book, Eating Right in America, which was published in 2013, and which is a history of the relationship. It was the history of dietary advice from the late 19th century to the present, and it really traces the historical relationship between dietary ideals and social ideals. And what I want to do in my talk is draw selectively, pull out some of the key points, and see how this history, the history of dietary advice, can help us to think differently about green smoothies in the present. But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about where the questions came from that really drive this research project. And I think this is a useful thing to do because the story of where this project comes from really speaks to how thinking historically can change the way we engage in the present. And I also really wanted to be, also like Clifford, show a picture of me from a really, really long time ago. So it's 1993-ish, and I've dropped out of college and moved to San Francisco and gotten very lucky and gotten a job as a cook at Green's Restaurant. And that's me in the corner in my chef whites. But I dropped out of college in large part because I wanted to study the social and cultural aspects of food. I wanted to study food history, and it simply wasn't done at the time, and it was very frustrating to me. So I declared that I was moving to San Francisco to work with vegetables and did that. But while I was working at Green's, I was also reading as much as I could about food history. And I found this incredible book called Perfection Salad. This book was about a group of reformers at the turn of the century, female reformers who dedicated themselves to changing people's eating habits, improving people's diet, because they believed that teaching people to eat right could elevate their morals and improve their characters, and that it could solve the most pressing social problems facing them at the time. This story was really striking to me, especially because at that very moment, right across the bay from where I was working, a famous restaurateur, the restaurateur of Chez Panisse, Alice Waters, was turning her attention from the restaurant to social reform. Because as she stated at the time, she believed that teaching people to eat right could elevate their morals and improve their characters and solve some of the most pressing social problems facing us at the time. So the similarities between these two women, Ellen Richards was the leader of the domestic scientists, that's her in the middle here, and this was their social reform project, the New England Kitchen, where they tried to teach the poor how to eat right. And there you see Alice Waters at the Edible Schoolyard, her primary social reform project in Berkeley. So separated by 100 years, these women have the exact same idea about why we should teach people to eat right, but their idea about what a good diet is, what exactly they should be teaching people, were completely opposite. Not a little different, but totally and completely opposed to each other. Different, opposite. Domestic scientists' aim was to remove from American kitchens history, sensuality, intuition, tradition, and replace all of that with science and rationality, right, and the values of industry. 100 years later, Alice Waters is trying to bring back exactly those qualities that domestic scientists had gotten rid of, or tried to get rid of. So their ideas about what a good diet are completely opposite, but their convictions about why we should teach people to eat right are the same, right? So clearly, there's something about teaching people to eat right that transcends the content of the dietary advice itself. And this is what I became completely obsessed with understanding, and this is what gave me a very different relationship, right? What Alice Waters was saying at the time was totally intuitive. It felt so natural and right to me as a cook at Greens at the time. And it was right and natural to everyone around me. But my understanding of history at that just from reading that book, completely changed the way I saw what was going on around me. It changed my perception, and it put me on the path to be able to be in a room and write a book where I tried to change other people's perceptions of what's going around us in terms of the politics of nutrition, using history as a tool to do that. So like I said, I want to just pull out a few key points from my research and see how they can help us rethink the present using green juices as an example. Okay, so the first big idea here is that dietary advice is always both empirical and ethical. So what does this mean? The point is that dietary advice always does two things at the same time. It provides a set of rules. This is the empirical piece. Rules, what you should do, guidelines for how to eat right. But those guidelines also always function as a set of guidelines for how you might make yourself into a good kind of person, into a moral and responsible person, for example. So let's use this example from the turn of the century to try to explicate this a little bit. This table was published in 1888 by Wilbur Olin Atwater, who is known as the father of American nutrition. And this table is called The Comparative Expenses of Food. At this moment, this is the moment of the emergence of the modern science of nutrition, right? And Atwater publishes a table in which he is trying to teach a very new way of thinking about what a good diet is. Food isn't good simply because you like it, and it's not good. It's not better because it's more expensive, right? Instead, he's trying to convey a new idea of what a good diet is, and let's see what he's expressing here. Along one side of this table, you have a variety of food materials. Then he shows how much of each food material can be purchased for 25 cents and how much of various nutrients are made available in 25 cents worth of each of these different foods. The idea of a good diet that Atwater is trying to convey here is that a good diet is one which provides the most nutrients, that is, the most energy for work, at the least possible cost. But where does this idea of a good diet come from? It doesn't emerge from the lab, right? This idea of a good diet comes from social concerns. It comes in particular from concerns about the social impact of industrialization, and especially concerns about the possibility of labor unrest. So Atwater and his contemporaries believe that if they teach people to choose diets that provide the most energy for work at the least possible cost, that they can allay the possibility that people will take to the streets and demand higher wages, right? So what's conveyed here in very objective, quantitative terms is actually a very qualitative measure of social values, such as thrift and frugality and responsibility. It is a set of ethical principles that are obscured, right, by the empirical. And we see this very often in dietary advice. It's expressed in empirical terms, but there's always an ethical component that is obscured within that. So this starts to get us thinking about how even our most objective scientific and quantitative ways of thinking about the goodness, for example, of a green juice and the badness, for example, of a sugary soda, are always also at the same time, I would argue, very much layered with social concerns and with social values. and with social ideals. And I want to build that next point right now. So the second key point I want to draw out is this idea that dietary ideals, in fact, represent and express ideals of good citizenship. So this, I want to turn to this back to the time period of World War II and to the National Nutrition Program. This was a home front nutrition program, nutrition education program that was part of the wider home front food programs that you might be more familiar with, rationing and victory gardening and canning, but this is really about nutrition education. And I love this poster. This was like the centerpiece of the campaign. I love it because it really expresses the way in which the ethical and the empirical are interrelated. You really have here the rules in the outer circle. Here are the groups. Choose something from each every day. And inside, you really see conveyed what it's all about on an ethical level. The U.S. needs us strong, eat the basic 7 every day. Strong, of course, in both a biological sense, but also in a social sense. We need good citizens for the war effort. And what I found throughout my research of looking at a ton of materials put together by these wartime reformers is that the good eater was believed to have all of the qualities that were also associated with being a good wartime citizen. So I saw good eaters being described as having everything from good eyesight and good posture, steadiness of nerve, alertness, courage, willpower, and a good attitude towards the war, right? All of the qualities believed to be important to good home front citizen were also believed to be accessible through eating right. I'm not sure what's going on with the sound. It sounds a little weird. What's that? Oh, it's not me at all. Okay. So here's another good example from that time period. We see here the worker who's helping Uncle Sam. This piece was part of the nutrition and industry program, so it was distributed to defense workers in the defense plants. And it's called Eat Well to Work Well, the lunchbox should carry a hearty meal. And you see this picture of this really just like super, he's glowing, this worker, he's glowing with health, and he's eating his hearty sandwich, and he has his milk. And the text underneath, I understand, is hard for you to read. So I'll just tell you, like the first line here is, it's advice to the worker about how to be both a good eater and a good citizen. Eat a hearty lunch every day to help keep you in top-notch physical condition, to make you feel like doing your job and playing ball with your fellow workers. It continues, eat plenty of foods containing vitamin A and drink plenty of milk and on and on. And I think that all of this, this conflation between the ideals of good citizenship and being a good eater raise a very important question, right? What then does it mean if for those who can't or won't or for some reason don't eat right? So this is the facing page of that pamphlet. The worker helping Hitler is scrawny, he's bedraggled, he looks a little deranged, slightly racialized even, and underneath this worker is a set of sarcastic advice about how to be a very bad citizen. Eat a poor lunch every day so you'll have many accidents, spoil much material, and keep your fellow workers from getting their work done while you quarrel with them, for example. And you see he's eating pie and donuts for lunch. He's a very bad eater and a very bad citizen. And, there's this, it's sarcastic and there's something sort of funny about this, but I think there, really is something quite serious going on here. Like the bad eater is being equated with the very worst kind of wartime citizenship, right, with treason. And we might think that this is a product of a less enlightened age, certainly a less ironic age. But there's plenty of iconography and imagery from the present that suggests that our ideas about what it means to be a good eater are still very much aligned with our notion of good citizenship. And these images all come, these are from 2004. I could have certainly shared many, many more contemporary images with you, but I just love these too much. These are from the National Body Challenge. It was a nationwide collective weight loss program run by the Discovery Health Network, and it also involved a television series in which 6 people were chosen to, quote, represent overweight America. And you can see that throughout the series, many of these images were replayed over and over and over again. The challengers standing in front of the Capitol building and the flag as the backdrop for the weight loss statistics. This one here is from the very first challenge that these challengers ran. They ran a Marine training course in Quantico, Virginia in fatigues. And they fell down and they passed out and they were rushed away in ambulances, and it was all like a big disaster, and it just kept replaying throughout the whole series. And so what I have found in my research is that dietary ideals have changed very much over the history of the last century, as have ideals of what it means to be a good citizen. But the relationship between dietary ideals and social ideals has remained consistent. And we can certainly see this dynamic at play in the relationship between the green juicer, right, and the bad soda drinker. And in many ways, this is really not that different from this. So the green juicer we understand very much in the terms of good citizenship that makes sense to us today, right? That is the terms of good neoliberal citizenship, in which we understand the green juicer to be exercising personal responsibility, self-discipline, and willpower, making informed and rational choices in the marketplace in the pursuit of health. While the soda drinker we understand to be irresponsible, lacking in self-discipline and willpower, and making poor choices that endanger not only her own health, but also the social and economic well-being of all of us. And clearly, there is a class component to this, and that's the last point I want to talk about. The last point here is that dietary advice constructs a moralized class hierarchy. So I want to think here for a minute about the history of the emergence of both the modern science. What is it? Oh, it's I was like, is my heart beating really loud? What could that be? Okay, I feel much better now that I know what I'm hearing. Okay, so the moral and social content of dietary health, to bring us back, it also plays a very important role in the construction and maintenance of the American middle class. The middle class and the modern science of nutrition emerged side by side at the end of the late 19th century. The middle class is looking for ways to know and define itself, to understand its unique character and identity, and to sort of construct and create its identity and character as unique from those especially below them in the social hierarchy. And health becomes a very important way in which the middle class does this work of constructing its identity. And dietary health in particular becomes part of this dynamic of self-making, which takes place through a very productive dynamic contrast, which we can understand, and this is Robert Crawford's language, as a contrast between the healthy self and the unhealthy other. And the way we can, this dynamic really talks about how the middle class constructs itself in contrast as healthy, in contrast not just to illness, but in contrast to those who are understood to be unhealthy, those who are understood to be already outside and stigmatized and other, and are also understood as unhealthy. And so these images are here to help us think about this, because one of the first instances I found historically of this occurring was when the domestic scientists, who you heard about very briefly before, this is the New England Kitchen, their project in a poor neighborhood in Boston that was meant to elevate the morals by teaching of poor workers flooding into the urban centers, by teaching them how to eat right, sending them home with pails of beef stew and brown bread and oatmeal. This project failed, you know. It turned out that the poor were not so interested in these pails of long-cooked beef and, pea mush. But at the very moment that they began to fail, the domestic scientists mounted a replica of the New England kitchen at the World's Fair in Chicago. And it was a resounding success. So they had the opportunity to talk very much about how the poor were incorrigible, irresponsible, could not be brought to try the things that might make them healthier, while the intelligent classes embraced the opportunity with enthusiasm. They were flexible, amenable, willing, engaged participants, right, in this project and in this experiment. And so I was very interested in the way in which, this constructed a dynamic contrast, right, between the middle classes healthy and those who are understood as the unhealthy other. And it's helpful to think about how this process of class making, using the language of health and dietary health in particular, stays with us today. So coming back to our juicer and our soda drinker, and of course, I want to just mention briefly that I have highlighted continuities, and there are many, many differences that are also important, but I think these lines of continuity are very useful in terms of being able to see the present differently, because it is very hard to see this stuff operating in the present, and history can sort of disorient us a little bit in a useful way. So clearly, the distinction between these two beverages and between their consumers is not just about the nutrients, and it's not just about the sensory properties. There's a lot more going on here, which we can understand by thinking historically about the relationship between dietary ideals and social ideals. Ideas about good food and bad food are always layered with social concerns and social values. They express ideals of good citizenship that are appropriate, that are culturally they express ideals of good citizenship that are active in that particular moment, right? The soda drinker, of course, has these qualities we think of as associated with bad citizenship, and the juicer, like I said earlier, it has all of the qualities that adhere to the good neoliberal citizen. And it's a very class and it's a very moralized distinction. There is this real sort of construction of what I think of as a moralized class hierarchy through our ideas about good juices and bad sodas. And history can really, I think, help us to understand this present differently. And I just want to just complicate things just a moment. These are the sodas we had for lunch today. So this is sweetened with 100% cane syrup, and it's a Whole Foods product. So my question for you to just think about is is this a bad soda or a good juice? It's a good soda, or it's green. This is a good soda in a way, but in a way it's a pass, right? It's the way in which the elites get to consume soda and still be good. So it's interesting. There's a real growing category of these sort of good sodas that, of course, they are better empirically and nutritionally, but there's also another component about social ideals, about morality, and about class that's always part of these conversations. So I hope to have shown you how history can help us to think differently about the present. It can help us to think differently about perception, and to have shown how history is a useful tool for helping us to rethink things that other people take for granted. As my moment of discovery in the Green's Kitchen suggests, history can reorient us in a way that we can see things differently than other people around us. And in a sense, what is more essential to innovation? If you're interested in thinking about the present or the future, being able to see the present differently, to sort of go through this process of having what seems normal be destabilized by our understanding of the past, can be a very useful tool. So thank you.